This is Capitalize Your Finances, the show representing you, a select group of excited, ready, and fired up listeners seeking to potentially maximize your money moves and get after it. We don't settle for generic advice of always and nevers. Our currency is our intellect, and we constantly seek the logical way of likely creating advantages to potentially maximize wealth for our personal and unique situations. The show brings you this step-by-step framework to capitalize your finances in the aspects of your financial situation, and we strive to explore strategies and ideas to potentially help you capitalize on your financial decisions. We are capitalizers, and this is our show.
Welcome back to Capitalize Your Finances. As always, I'm your host, Christopher A. Paniotu, the Cap in Capitalize. And today, we have a very special guest, the author of Don't Trust Your Gut, Seth Stephens-Davidowitz. Seth, welcome to the show, and I hope I said your last name as appropriately and correctly as humanly possible.
Close enough. I think with a last name like that, you'd be a real obnoxious human being to demand perfection, so I let it slip.
Okay. Well, and again,
you were closer than most. You were above average.
I was above average. So, like, if I had a grade, would you give me like a B plus, like an A minus?
B.
A B. Okay. All right. Well, not off to a great start. Hopefully, by the end of today, I can round up to at least a B plus, A minus. And Seth, I want listeners and capitalizers to kind of get a background of who you are, because you're going to be a little bit different guests than we've had in the past. And so, tell our listeners a little bit about the author behind the pen.
I've had a quirky life experience. I majored in philosophy at Stanford, and I realized at some point, there aren't really jobs in philosophy. There's actually, someone told me there's a fire department in Colorado that hires philosophy PhDs. So they can still talk philosophy, because you don't really have much to do as a firefighter. You mostly just sit in the fire department. So you get a job and you also still talk philosophy. But that's like the extent of the jobs as a philosopher these days. So I realized, okay, well, now I need like an actual, something, a marketable skill. So I switched to economics. I got my PhD in economics, and then I got obsessed during my PhD program. I got obsessed with search data and all the things you can learn about people from search data. So I wrote this book, Everybody Lies, about kind of what you can learn about people from their internet searches, behavior. I'd worked at Google for a little bit during that period, and then I kind of did really well, so it allowed me for a while to, up until now, be making my living as a writer, consultant, and keynote speaker. So I kind of been living the dream, living in New York, and writing, speaking, consulting, and then I wrote the second book, Don't Trust Your Gut, which you read.
Sure. Well, and I got to tell you, so what I found in your book, it was very fascinating, because a lot of these books that are sent to me up until recently, they're very financially focused. That started to pivot a couple episodes back when obviously Ryan Dusick from Maroon 5 sent me his memoir. Nick Hutchinson has sent me a number of his books. So it's starting to broaden. But there's always, even in those abstract books that you wouldn't think are financial bits of value. And yours was extremely fascinating. Obviously, anytime Adam Cecil sends me a book, I am, of course, going to hop on it like white on rice. And when I read your book, although it's not directly related to investing in financial planning, indirectly, I personally unlocked a tremendous amount of value that I'm going to apply in my own framework, both for myself and clients. And so with that, I just want to start diving into Don't Trust Your Gut, because it was a thoroughly enjoyable read, regardless if you are a nerd like you and I or not. And so, with that, in chapter 1, you mentioned a study by, I believe it was Harold Christensen, regarding what people looked for in a partner. And the number one single most important trait was dependable character, which we all kind of knew, even without that statistical backing. But I was thinking about this in how I can apply it in the world of finance and investing and planning, and specifically investments, as character is hard to quantifiably define. In your opinion, how would you try to quantifiably define that extremely valuable trait?
Well, the chapter's a little different. It's that if you actually look at what people look for in romantic partners, it's all these shiny qualities. Someone who's really attractive, a man who's tall, someone in a sexy profession, someone with a good income, good education. And if you look at what actually makes people happy, you follow couples 10, 20, 30 years down the road, it's character, conscientious, growth mindset, satisfaction with life, a secure attachment style, all these psychological traits. And I think what it shows is we kind of get fooled in dating and probably in hiring as well by people who look the part. So, if someone looks really, really hot, we kind of, pretty much all of us are like, yeah, I want to date that person, and don't necessarily do the best due diligence. And I think that's a similar problem that many of us face when we're hiring, that we, if someone looks like, oh, that person, looks like an investor, or looks like a good lawyer, then we're more likely to hire them. And you can kind of get tricked by that. Nassim Taleb has this great idea that if you go to a hospital and there are two surgeons and one of them looks like George Clooney and one of them looks like a total mess, you want to use the one who looks like a total mess, because the point is, to get to that point, they have to be so much better, because we have so much bias. We're so easily tricked by people who look the part that, someone who doesn't look the part is, has to kind of be that much better. So that's one. So kind of paying more attention to people who don't look the part would be how anybody could use the research on dating.
It's kind of interesting, I don't want to just jump to the conclusion of hey, if someone is just so brutally atrocious like Harvey Weinstein, that's the guy that you want in your corner. But the more I think about it, and of course I'm not going to say any names because that would just crush some people's hearts and souls and just emotional stability. But you think of these CEOs and executives that have done really well for some of these Fortune 500 companies, and they are kind of atrocious to look at. So it is kind of unique. And speaking of that whole idea of not necessarily, hiring someone because they're hot or whatever the case is, but you mentioned that data suggests that single people are predictably tricked by the shininess, and, related to finance more so. Actually, not even finance, just more so in general. What would you say are the shininess is, if that's a word, that draw people away from truly profound success in lives, specifically financial and professional?
I would think that kind of, I have this section on the businesses that go out of business quickest. It was one of the chapters chapter on who is secretly rich in America. And the business that goes out quickest is record store, and then toy store, clothing store, cosmetic store. Those last 2 years, 3 years on average. In comparison, a dentist's office lasts 19.5 years. So I think, in starting a business, a lot of people get really attracted to something they loved as a kid, and that's kind of shiny, record store. There have been movies about people who started record stores, and I think it's not really a good business, and people don't look at things that are, more sustainable. You might be able to build some moat around you. There's less competition. So, I talk about things like beverage distributors, great business, and, real estate. People maybe know that a little more. Market research. There's businesses that are a little less shiny but more reliable. And similarly, patience is good in one's career. The average successful entrepreneur is 43 years old, and a lot of people don't realize that. They think, the average successful entrepreneur is 20 or 21, Mark Zuckerberg in their dorm room, and that happens, but it's very, very rare. So, trying to be the next Mark Zuckerberg isn't necessarily is not a good life strategy.
No, and the odds of that are very slim. Now, before we talk about the rich, I did want to ask just a quick little fun fact. So when we first got together, we discovered that we're obviously both obsessed with sports. And being that as we're recording this, March Madness is in full bloom. And so depending on your bracket, you are either doing very, very well or you are just embarrassingly sad. But I wanted to ask, so first off, if you do a March Madness bracket and or a fantasy football type of league, what is your process of going through that? Like, do you have like a mathematical strategy behind it? I've been uberly curious to pick your brain at this.
No, I basically used to do it like, and I have an obsessive personality, and if I do it, I just do it like all the time. So if I do an NCAA March Madness bracket, I watch every game, I study every game, and before I'm filling it in, I study all the teams too much. I'm just like, this is just too time consuming. And similarly for fantasy sports, it's just so addictive to me that I kind of don't do it, because if I do it, it's very hard to kind of focus on other things. So,
right.
I haven't done either in a while.
Well, and especially fantasy football. I have formally retired from fantasy football. I think last season was my first season not. And it was just that. I mean, not so much Thursday nights, but Sundays, you're glued to it all day. In best case scenario, your team does what you think it's supposed to do. But then worst case scenario, like my wife and now my daughter would have to live through me just being like, just ticked off all day, right? And it's like the risk reward is just not there. Now, speaking of risk reward, let's get into the rich. And you mentioned multiple times in the book, backed with data, of course, that in order to become rich, rich people own, so they're not employees, but they also own the right things. And so why do you think that really everyone else goes for the sexy yet statistically unrewarding careers over the most successful? But more importantly, how do we combat that lack of emotional intelligence so people can learn to live a data-driven, fulfilling career while also making some good money?
Yeah, like I hoped to write this book, like everyone would just be looking at the charts, because there are kind of formulas for some of these success. What makes good business, what makes good entrepreneur, and for me, definitely, it's been helpful to just, when you look at the data, you tend to make better decisions afterwards. And so I don't know that. So I do think just presenting people with the data. If you see that, toy stores, clothing stores, all these businesses that go out that are so terrible kind of fit in this one category that they're shiny and the stuff of childhood dreams, then maybe you're going to be more likely not to start that, not to quit your job to start one. And if you learn that market research is a great business, or investing, or real estate, then you might be more likely to go into that. So just presenting people with information, I think, can be really useful. And then I hope people use the information to make better decisions.
Yeah, well, and it was kind of funny. I remember reading your book, and after I read it, I was thinking, being now a new dad, I was trying to think like, okay, how can I statistically set up my daughter for success? And really, according to the book, not to give too much away, because capitalizers, if you haven't already bought the book, you need to go buy the book. It's a winner and a half. In theory, if my daughter grows up, according to what we said earlier, just atrociously ugly, gets into fencing, and then jumps into like real estate or market research, like she is well on her way to statistically having like the easiest route to success of all time. But of course, in theory, like that's only in theory. I do not want my daughter to grow up absolutely atrocious. But I did have a question for you, and this was really fascinating, and I actually think this is going to be very valuable for our listeners tuning in. And so can you first lay out, because you talk about this concept of zero profit condition. So first enlighten our listeners on what that is.
The zero profit condition is just that if you make profit in a business, you'll have a competitor enter that business. So let's say you're selling something for $100, it costs you $50 to make. Someone will join that business, make it for $50 and sell it for $90, and someone else try to sell it for $80, $70, $60. Basically, as long as you're making profit, competitors have an incentive to enter the field and take away your profit. So it kind of shows how hard it is to make money in business, because So many people are, if you have profit, then you could have a competitor. What's to prevent someone from undercutting you on price?
Right. And so now that we have that, so I kind of wanted to have a conversation on the argument of why businesses, they can't get away with charging more. Like if you look at the most successful businesses out there, and I'll just think of, Hershey, I'm pulling one out of the hat. They could go and raise their prices for chocolate basically every year. And, according to the shape of the average American, I don't think they're going to stop selling chocolate anytime soon. Or McDonald's, or Apple, or Microsoft, whatever. Like the list goes on and on. But I'm curious why a lot of these smaller businesses don't latch onto that, because if you've got that, what we call an investing moat, right, and that strong brand, you could actually probably get away, and I'm not saying gouge people, but you could increase your profits over time, but everyone still wins. Why do you think businesses don't decide to do that?
Well, it's just so few businesses have a legitimate moat. So when a business does, Netflix or, Apple, then they do frequently raise their prices. But, I think sometimes these things work in the short term. You also have to, worry that you're getting a short-term gain for a long-term big cost, that, you might raise your prices and the elasticity is such that you'll increase profits now, but that may give an incentive for a competitor to enter the field, and it may, customers may be just a little more frustrated with you. Your brand will suffer long term. So you can't just, in deciding whether to raise prices, you can't just do this very simple calculation of, the elasticity and how much quantity is going to go down with this % price increase, because there are other considerations as well.
Well, and that actually ties into, if you have that long-term prudency, which listeners know I'm obsessed with that. That is that's my theme. That's my mission statement of life. Stay prudent. And you actually wrote a get-rich checklist. Okay, it's very small, but nonetheless, it's very valuable. And so your 3 questions that you ask readers are: number 1, do I own a business?
Yeah.
Number 2, does the business have a path to avoid ruthless price competition? And then number 3, does the business have a path to avoid being dominated by a global behemoth? And, I was thinking about this, and again, I know you're a buddy of Adam's. I couldn't help but wonder, being such a data-driven guy, have you ever thought about getting into the world of investing? Because your quantitative mind is brilliantly rare.
I do consulting for investing, and there have been times I've thought about getting into it full time, because I do think some of the skills that that I'm using to make sense of research or do my own research and data and are similar to what a lot of investors are doing, and looking for that needle in haystack. And in kind of the process of this book is you read 100 studies and 2 of them have a big insight. And kind of similarly for investing, you go through 100 businesses, 100 reports, and then 2 of them are like, oh, that's actually a good business. So it is something that I've thought about for sure. Well, it's also more lucrative than book writing.
Yes,
you probably know that, right?
Yeah, yes, it is. Well, because I was thinking about it, and a lot of people in investing, like I tell people all the time, I use the football analogy, right? You kick a field goal, and on either side of the goalpost, one is the art and the other is the science, and too often people sway one way or another, and if you sway one way or another too far, you're gonna get hurt. You're gonna either miss opportunity, your emotion's gonna get in the way, or you look too much at the numbers that it's not gonna work out. But you even mentioned, and I'm blanking on the name, because a lot of people think Warren Buffett is the greatest investor of all time, which I think it's pretty hard to argue against it. However, statistically, and again, you mention it in the book, I've read about him just ad nauseum, and my sleep-deprived father brain is blanking on the name, but he was a mathematician.
James Simons.
Thank you. Good Lord. Yeah. Thank you. If you didn't tell me that, I would have gone all day just freaking out. So James Simons, he earned, and I don't want to misspeak, but I I think it was like 60 something percent over, and we're talking years.
Yeah, and everyone always points that the reason that Warren Buffett is so rich because he started so early and took advantage of compound interest. And James Simon started pretty late. He was a professor of mathematics. I think he started in his 40s or something. His hedge fund, and the returns have just been insane year after year in their medallion fund, like 60%. It's just like nobody does that.
No, well, and that was my thing, thinking, and I don't want your head to get too big here, because then you won't be able to leave your apartment with the ego just oozing, right? But I thought, man, Seth could go toe to toe with this, even if you're half as good as him. Right, you're still earning 30%. No one's going to. I don't know
that that's how it works. That half is good makes 30%. I don't know. Yeah, it's something I thought about thinking of finance. A lot of my friends are quantitative traders. I mean, there are more quantitative shops than just Renaissance. There's Two Sigma and Jane Street and lots of others, and they all tend to do pretty well. It does seem to be one of the rare successful trading strategies.
Yeah. But on the flip side, the amount of work that goes into that is just, I mean, it's absolutely insane. Well, and you, kind of switching gears a little bit, you mentioned at the end of, I believe it was chapter 5, that, and I want to quote unquote you here, one can have a higher chance of being successful if one patiently builds skills in a narrow field and then strikes on their own. Now, that resonated a lot with me. That's very much how I live my life, the quote-unquote concentrated portfolio methodology. But I wanted to ask you, knowing why that's the case, why do so many people, both in my industry, just in general, preach the whole idea of diversification, not just in investing, but in life, other than the fact that risk aversion is a thing?
Yeah, well, that sentence is from studies that say that the most successful entrepreneurs are they enter a field that they have a lot of experience in. It goes against, there's this counterintuitive idea of the outsider's edge, that can be an advantage to be an outsider, and it turns out not really true, that on average the best entrepreneurs are deep insiders with very specialized domain knowledge. And I think diversification, they're just different. They're different questions. So whether you want to diversify a career, I don't think many people say that you should spend 1 year doing one thing, 1 year doing another thing, 1 year doing another thing until you die. I think most people do agree that you should kind of spend many, many years mastering some narrower skill set. But I think in investing, it's just a different question, because obviously the risk of having all your money in one stock is you can lose it, so more likely to lose it. So it's just a different question than what you should do with your career, what you should do with your savings.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one, because I both agree. I could also disagree on that as well, because, for example, in the investing world, just to play devil's advocate, I'm not against diversification, for those in compliance that are lurking in the bushes trying to hit me or whatever the case is. I'm all about it, but I think it gets overplayed, because if you look in the investing world, and it's very hard to beat certain benchmarks or whatever the case is. And I'm not saying that if you do this, you are going to. But if you look at all the most successful investors out there, the one common theme that they have is they don't have a ton of eggs. They might have, like, I remember, who was it? Oh my gosh. Why am I blanking on his name? He ran Gotham Capital in
Ackman?
New York. Yeah, thank you. No, Bill Ackman. Not Bill Ackman. It was, oh my gosh, Joel Greenblatt. Thank you. Joel Greenblatt famously ran Gotham Capital. I think he earned like 40% or something like that over a decade. And he famously had, I think it was like 5, maybe 7 stocks. For years, Warren Buffett, Berkshire Hathaway was really a handful. The majority of Berkshire Hathaway was Coca-Cola, See's Candy, I believe there was Gillette in there, American Express. Again, I'm not giving advice, but the whole point is it was very, very concentrated. And even if you look at Bezos, how do you make all his money? It was all in one stock. I mean, you could argue that was his career, but it's kind of a fascinating thing where I agree with you that investing in a career, it is a different question. My wish, and this is what we talked about on the show, is people can appreciate the work that they put into their career just as much as they appreciate the work that they're going to have to put into investing if they want to truly become successful in that, or partnering with the right person. So that was my...
I mean, part of that's a little bit survivor bias and luck. So, if you invest in the S&P 500, you're not going to beat the S&P 500.
Right.
So the only way to beat the S&P 500 is to have some subset, if you're investing in those same stocks, to have some subset of that. And, some people pick 10 stocks that do really well. Some people do 10 stocks that do really poorly. And the ones who pick the 10 stocks that do really poorly, we don't hear about them. So,
no, yeah, they suddenly get really, really, really quiet. Well, in speaking of businesses, and I'm really glad you brought this story up in your book. I love the Airbnb story because it was the definition between failure and billionaire by we're talking paper thin margins. And I was just more curious for you personally, what has been your quote unquote luck moment in your life?
I've had a lot of lucky moments when I look at it. I think getting into the schools I got into, each thing kind of compounds on itself. So the great thing about getting lucky is one lucky break leads to another lucky break. And getting into all the schools I got into, and then just random things. My book came out, and I was invited to give this talk, the Sohn Research Conference, in New York City, and I have a speaking fee, and they said, we're doing it for free. We do it for free. I said, no, I only do talks for money. And then they said that it's for pediatric cancer. I said, all right, I'll do it. And end up speaking in front of the 2,000 of the probably most prominent finance people in New York City. And that led to all kinds of connections and consulting deals and speaking opportunities. And, when I was doing it, I wasn't thinking like that. So that's another kind of example of luck. There have been many more than that.
Capitalizers, this episode is sponsored by the best-selling book, Capitalize Your Finances, the how-to framework that takes you from compoundingly clueless to monetarily magnificent. Regardless of where you're at in your financial life, whether you're just beginning to express interest and commitment to your personal finances, at the pinnacle of your career, winding down into retirement, or thinking about your legacy for future generations, this book walks you through every step of the way so you can succeed on your terms and with your own values and passions guiding you. After reading this book, you will officially have Christopher A. Panayotou, the Cap in Capitalize, in your back pocket, guiding you in detail through every step of the way so that you can take charge of your finances, not the other way around. Head on over to Amazon.com today and start capitalizing your finances to the fullest with this incredible book, Capitalize Your Finances, the how-to financial framework that takes you from compoundingly clueless to monetarily magnificent. And now, back to the episode.
Sure. Well, and I also wanted to ask you, so you mentioned the DaVinci Effect in your book. And so briefly explain to our listeners what the DaVinci Effect is, and then I'll get into my actual question.
Well, there's an example of a painting that sold for $10,000 when people didn't know who painted it, and then people found out it was Da Vinci, and it sold for millions. And similarly, J.K. Rowling wrote a novel under a pen name that totally languished, and people found out it was J.K. Rowling, and it exploded. Kind of the idea is that it's who you are, that once you have a big name, kind of anything you put out is going to get a lot of attention, a lot of support, a lot of recognition, and so the key is to kind of hustle your way so you have that name, and once you have the name, then you're in really good shape.
And so because of that, because I as a now public figure, I was thinking about this both for myself and then my friends that are also in podcasting and growing their own business. And so what would you say are the ways where someone could create their own DaVinci Effect in business?
So one of the big things is just putting a lot of content out there. So, there are studies of artists, and kind of the most successful artists frequently produce the most work. And the idea is that there's so much luck in which particular piece of work gets the most attention. But if you put, a lot more work out there than everyone else, you have more opportunities to get lucky, to get your big break. So I think that's definitely one thing that anybody can do in the content business is put a lot of work out there to, get seen, and then kind of diversify your network. This is actually, building a network, meeting lots of different people, traveling around, connecting with people through a podcast, all those things, I think is also really smart as well.
Sure. And then from just a business side of like purely business, you're not in podcasting, you're just running your own business. What would you say are the best piece of advice statistically to succeed in your own DaVinci Effect?
Hustling like crazy and just out marketing people early on, I'd say would be a big one. Some newsletters, Morning Brew, like they just wrote a newsletter and they just used referrals and all these marketing techniques that other people didn't do. James Patterson, the novelist, he had worked in advertising, and he realized that the fiction world basically wasn't using the tools of marketing, so he could just use the tools of marketing that he had learned in the world of fiction, and he just treated his books as if they were toothpaste, and he hustled like crazy to get more attention for his books, and then he became James Patterson, and now he has a DaVinci Effect where he has all these fans and everyone just reads his books because he's James Patterson.
Sure. I love that example. Well, and one general question of success that I had for you. So you've talked about this idea of people not knowing what makes themselves happy, and specifically referencing to those that have achieved some massive level of success, which obviously is relative, but our minds can kind of wander into what that means. And then they look back on the fact and go, oh, whatever it is, was it really worth it? I shouldn't have done this, right? I should have spent time doing that. And so my question is a two-parter. And so my first is, do you think people forget to fall in love with the process that got them to that successful moment? And then second, do you think that in order to be able to discuss that, oh, I should have done this, and this, people have to get to that place of success first before they realize it? And I say that because I've heard a lot of people that they have this conversation and they're bringing up all of these statistical facts, but knowing what they've done, just frankly, with their life, I think it's an excuse for them subconsciously to throw all that out there so they don't have to take the plunge. Does that make sense?
Wait, say that again? I'm not sure I totally understood.
So, for example, let's say that the second parter. Let's say that you have a friend, and this friend, really nice person, but they're just kind of coasting on by. But they keep throwing all of these stats out of, oh my gosh, and people were on their deathbed, they regretted this, and this. Or if you ask the most successful people in the world, they wish they didn't do this or that. And you're sitting here going, well, because I've thought that. It's like, well, shouldn't you have to get to that point first before you can turn around and have that conversation?
Yeah. So you're saying people should work harder and strive for success, and then you shouldn't just take the fact that people regret success on their deathbed to just say, well, now I'm not going to do anything.
Yeah. Take you, for example. You've written 2 incredible books, one a New York Times bestseller, on your way to 2, and many more, of course. And without knowing every single thing about you, I know you've had trial and tribulations. I know you've had things where you would have to look back and go, I really wish I didn't do this. Or then you even laugh at I can't believe I did that. But then, people would look at you or anyone in your position and they go, okay, well, he has this level of success. He's looking back on all of these things. Well, I'm looking at myself. I haven't really done a whole heck of a lot with myself. Therefore, I'm just going to not even try to get to that level, and I'm just going to kind of coast. And then
I think the key is just finding the area, the time you're enough with, where it's enough. which is something I struggle with in my own life as well, is when are you, I think there are people who it's too late, they never enjoy the fruits of their labor, and there are people it's too early, and, people who start doing drugs in high school or college and, don't really apply themselves and, are still trying to catch up in their careers, that they probably took the foot off the gas too early. And then there are some people who I would say, they're still working hard at, for my professors from grad school, some of them are still trying to win a Nobel Prize at 70 or 80. And I'm like, man, just smell the roses.
You're right.
They probably, I would argue they, should take their foot off the gas. So I think I think there are people who are on both sides of that mistake.
Yeah. But you see what I mean? It's a complex question. It's the classic chicken or the egg. But when you're talking about just overall business success, whatever that means, I can look back on my career. I'm not saying I'm the most successful person I know. I'm far from it. But I can look back and go, gosh, I shouldn't have done this, this, and this. But on the flip side, I can look myself in the mirror and go, man, at 31, I'm proud of what I've built. But then I've had a lot of people then come to me and they're almost like telling me like oh, these are the things you need to do. But I'm like, what have you done? And it's kind of it's an interesting conundrum.
Definitely, if you're working really hard, people will tell you to not work so hard. And is that right? Is that wrong? I think it's a hard question. It's not, again, I've seen people make both mistakes. Like, there are definitely people where I'm like, man, you really, I even see in my own life, there are times where I took my foot off the gas, I think, at the wrong moment. And now, like, I look back, I'm like, that was time I wish I still need to hustle more, and I kind of was coasting a little bit. There are periods in my life where I say, I wish I'd hustled. So I don't know. There's not necessarily an answer, but then there are times where I'm like, wow, I'm glad I hustled so much. To get into grad school, like, I had majored in philosophy, I had to become an economist, so I worked my ass off for 3 years. I was super depressed. I was living like this tiny apartment, like just working for professors and in a basement and studying and like taking classes, and it was just an awful period of my life, 3 years, and it ended up I got into Harvard PhD program. And now the rest of my life, I guess it's kind of a little bit of a DaVinci Effect where I'm like, I'm a Harvard PhD. That's like, that was such a great, like, I'm so happy that I hustled like that. And so I don't know. Yeah, I think, but then for 6 months after Don't Trust Your Gut came out, like, I was making good money consulting, and I was like, I was kind of like, and it wasn't that, like, I didn't work 40, 50 hours because there's an hourly wage. And I'm like, I'm okay with working 10 hours and getting a, good salary. And I just kind of enjoyed myself. I'm like, I'm just going to like travel a lot. I like, I really was enjoying myself. And now I'm like, was that a mistake? Like, then 6 months later, you're always like, your past self, you're like, man, if my past self had just worked harder, I would have more consulting business. I'd have more of this. I'd have more of that. So I don't know, is that a mistake, or is that it's good to smell the roses sometimes? I don't know. It's something I struggle with in my own life. Like, because one thing you will learn is when you take the foot off the gas, you get less stuff. And when you have the foot on the gas, more things come to you. So like, there's no getting around it. There's no like hack where it's like, I can not hustle for a while and, there's a period where my inbox was just filled with speaking gigs and consulting gigs and so called this, and then I didn't hustle as much, and the inbox gets, less filled with stuff, and you're like, oh man, should I have hustled? But then on the other hand, you don't want to be in your deathbed and being like, all I did is hustle. So I don't know. It's kind of it's a hard question for sure.
It is.
What's kind of the optimal amount to work?
Yeah. Well, and even for and as you were going through all that, so your point's like, hey, I really just put my foot on the gas. And the reason why I was asking this, and it kind of irks me even today, because I feel like we live in this society, at least our generation and even younger, where, it's this whole push of work less. And I'm going, okay, well, if you do that, like it you can't have your cake and eat it too. And it's just a fascinating thing. And then I also I get this. Some people just don't like their jobs. Okay.
Yeah.
That's right. It is what it is. But I also think we're in this world now where there has never been a better opportunity to capitalize on the opportunities that you have at your fingertips. And I can tell you, and I don't know if this is going to help you or not, I'm not giving you unwarranted advice on a show, but like for me, I've struggled with that as well. The balancing of, do I want to, like one of my biggest struggles is, do I want to just 10x my business, or do I want to be a really present husband and father? And a lot of people would look at that and go, oh, well, that's so easy, Chris. Like, it's a no-brainer. And it is a no-brainer, but it's not easy, especially when, your business in many cases is your baby. And so now I'm at this point where I've truly fallen in love with the process, not the end. Because even when you wrote your book, both books, and it's a grind writing a book. I mean, we both understand that. But now knowing what I know, especially when I write another book, when you continue to write, at least for me, it's like, okay, I know what the process is. So it's a simple mind shift of, I'm going to fall in love with the process.
Yeah.
And that's why I was asking, do you think people forget to fall in love with the process? Because I think
that's right. So my second book, I actually have some regrets on that I didn't fall in love with the process, because my first book had done so well that my second book, I felt so much pressure. I'm just like, this isn't going to be as good as my first book. And I kept on like beating myself up. I'm like, this isn't innovative. This isn't this and that. And instead of just being like, this book's the best idea I have right now. I'm going to love the process, do the best job I can, enjoy myself. And it's a huge, that is actually one of my bigger regrets in life, is anytime I didn't fall in love with the process. So I think anytime you're like, yeah, that's a great idea. If you love the process, then it doesn't really feel like work, and then the whole work-life balance thing doesn't really mean as much, because it's like, oh, I want to do what I'm doing and everything. So I think the reason people are talking about work-life balance so much, though, is just there's so much money in America right now that
sure
it's increasingly easy if you have a good education, no bad cards, to kind of get like enough of a living where you can just live such a nice life. I think that people are like, well, do you need to hustle to, like, obviously if you're born in, Vietnam, a rice farmer, like you basically have no choice but to grind all the time to, achieve to achieve any sort of life, to put food on the table, whatever. But, I think Americans are finding that, you can be a corporate lawyer and make millions a year, but like you sacrifice, the law firm owns you, and then you fly first class, and you stay in nicer hotels, and you do all these things. But is that worth the sacrifice? Or you can do something that's a little less, less intense, and you still will find you have money to take nice trips. You have money to go to restaurants. You have money to buy the things you want to read. You have money for the internet, entertainment. Like you kind of, I think, there's enough money in American society. It's kind of like Europe has been for so long, where there's been so much money in the society that I think people haven't felt the need to work that hard, because they're kind of like, you can enjoy such a good life without the 80, 90, 100-hour weeks that you have to put in to be an investment banker, or a lawyer, or a tenured professor. So I don't know. It's a tough question. There's no easy answer. It's like, you could wake up I know people wake up at 40 with regrets on both sides.
Yeah.
People's like, why did I give up my 20s and 30s climbing this hill? And also, why did I spend my 20s and 30s smoking weed?
Right. Yeah. So ideally, you just need to keep climbing the hill, smoking weed the whole time. That's it. That's the answer, right? Yeah. So
no, I think that.
Go ahead.
No, maybe, I don't know. Maybe that's the worst case scenario. But I think all I know is there's no easy answer, and I myself, I think the thing you say about enjoying the process, I think you really got to just do what you do, and then just not overthink it. But I'm terrible at it. Like, make your decision. You're going to work hard, really hard. You're not going to work as hard. You're going to 10x your business. You're going to keep your business like it is and focus on your family, and then just you do it, and then you just live with it. So, but not sit around regretting.
Yeah. Oh, regret it's a very deadly sin. Well, and speaking of not only success but like passive success. So you even mentioned later in your book that according to the data, passive activities, they don't yield much happiness, which is probably going to shock a lot of people. Yet passive patience is the key to not only investing, but really just success in the long run. And so from your experience, would you say that that's the main statistical reason behind most people doing poorly in the long run, whether it's investing or just success in general?
Impatience?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say so. I think, sure, the famous marshmallow experiment.
Yes.
If you can wait for a marshmallow, you're much more likely to be successful in life. Although I think it's been debunked a bit, but I think, it's so hard. Anytime something's thrown in front of you, and I'm guilty of this as well, like, a little money, a little like, a job, like, I'm kind of at a point, like, turning it back to me. I feel like I'm turning things back to me too often, but I guess I am the guest on the podcast.
It's okay. So. You are the guest, man. Go for it.
But I'm I'm looking what I'm doing next, and I'm like, maybe I could use a job. My life is, as nice as it's been, feels kind of unstable with like all these random things I do, and maybe a more normal job would be right. But sometimes I panic, and I'm like, I need a job tomorrow, and like, I would take any job that someone gives me, and that's like the dumbest thing to do. Like, I have plenty of money saved. I'm like, the right thing to do is be very patient and wait for, the right opportunity to come, and not rush into anything. But it is, someone gives you a nice title or gives you like, money or whatever. It's very hard to turn it down necessarily, and I think it is, kind of that patient grind is really one of the, really something that is still undervalued today.
Yeah. Well, in speaking of what's coming down the pike, which I know we're actually coming to a close here, and we're going to have you back on when you write your next book and your next book and your next book and your next. I don't know how.
Everyone always thinks that I write more books than I do. Like, I send my book to people like, is this your 20th book already? I'm like, no, it's only my second book. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not as productive as people seem to think I am.
Well, and I don't know if you had this happen with your first book. I remember telling people that, and obviously I'm a jokester a little bit, so I was texting people like links to my book, like, hey, I wrote a book, whatever the case is, and like half of my friends just didn't open the link. They're like, I'm not opening this. I'm like, why? They're like, it's not, like, it's going to be a prank, right? We're going to open it, it's going to be some inappropriate picture, whatever the case is. And then I go, no, like, I swear on my mom's life, that's not the case. And then you have to explain, like, oh, you actually wrote a book. And then by the second time, I think, and again, I haven't written a second one, I'm on my second one, but by the second time it comes out, I think it's probably that subconscious buildup for all of your friends thinking, oh my gosh, this has got to be your 30th book because, especially with a New York Times bestseller. So that's probably why. But I did want to ask you, because we always love to know what our guests are working on. So what are you working on now that gets you excited every day? I mean, do you have a new book coming out, a new project? Tell our listeners what is on Seth's horizon.
Yeah, I'm thinking of doing this book, Don't Trust Your Gut, was the data of all kinds of areas of life. And I'm thinking of doing one by one, but like a book on each section, like a data science approach to some of these topics. So one of them I'm thinking of doing is data science of mental health, because we have such a big mental health crisis in society right now. And I want to really read all the studies, all the books, everything I get my hand on, and make sense of, the best things, the best treatments, the best whatever with data, and then go from there to try other topics as well. So that's one thing that's really on my mind.
Awesome. And do you, and I'm not putting pressure on you, but do you have an idea when that next project would be released so our listeners can snag it?
I always say 6 months, and it always ends up being about 5 years. So
Okay. Okay. I was gonna say if you like knocked out a book like that in 6 months, you are a savant.
Yeah,
An
no.
absolute savant. Well,
No.
Seth, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on Capitalize Your Finances. And before we wrap it up and let you go, where can capitalizers go to find and support you and your incredible work?
So I have a website, sethsd.com, and people can go there and learn more about me.
Awesome. And then is the best place for your books Amazon?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Well, we are going to have you back on when that next book comes out. And, I will leave you with this before we close it out. If you ever struggle with falling in love with the process, you know you have my cell. You can text me at any time. And I will give you that motivation, my man.
Great.
And for those of you that have listened through our amazing conversation with the award-winning author, Seth Stephens-Davidowitz,
B minus now.
Okay.
B minus this time.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for tuning into this episode. And if you have any questions about what went on in this episode, or just in general, you already know the drill. You can shoot me an email, chris@capitalizeyourfinances.com, or you can give us a call at 253-214-3050, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that come our way. If you have any guests that you think, hey, this person would be phenomenal to have on the show, you know the drill. You can hit me up at capitalizepodcast.com. Put in the comments, put in the submission. We look at it every single day, and I would be more than happy to see whoever I can hop on the pod and tell you how to capitalize on your finances. As always, I'm your host, Chris Ray Paniotu, the Cap and Capitalize. And until next time, keep capitalizing. Take care.
You should always seek counsel of the appropriate advisor prior to making any investment decision. All investments are subject to risk, including the loss of principal. This material was gathered from sources believed to be reliable. However, its accuracy cannot be guaranteed. The information contained herein does not constitute an offer to sell or a solicitation of an offer to buy securities. Investment products described herein may not be offered for sale in any state or jurisdiction in which such an offer, solicitation, or sale would be unlawful or prohibited by the specific offering documentation. No client or prospective client should assume that the presentation or any component thereof serves as the receipt of or a substitute for personalized advice from Capitalize Your Finances or from any other investment professional. Diversification strategies do not ensure a profit and cannot protect against losses in a declining market. S&P 500 Index is an unmanaged index and includes a representative sample of large-cap U.S. companies in leading industries. An investment may not be made directly in an index. Christopher Paniotu is a registered representative with and securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor and member FINRA SIPC. The investment professionals are affiliated with LPL Financial and are conducting business using the name Capitalize Your Finances, a separate entity from LPL Financial. Seth Stephens-Davidowitz and any other individual or company mentioned in this podcast are not affiliated with Capitalize Your Finances or LPL Financial.